Latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. So this retired Green Beret named Tony Aguilar he was a contractor of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or he's an employee of a contractor for said foundation, responsible for the distribution sites, the aid distribution sites in Gaza, and getting food and water to people who need it. Well, he's turned into be a whistleblower of sorts. He was on Tucker Carlson's program talking about a young boy he met named Amir, who was, according to him, suffering all of the ill effects of malnutrition. And then he uses the story of Amir to tell the larger story about what he says is happening at the hands of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And he says he's telling these stories because, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is funded by American tax dollars, and we should know what's going on. Here's what Tony Aguilar alleges. He's first, as I mentioned, BBC and then Tucker, and he's been making the rounds telling the same story. But there is pushback, by the way, to what you're about to hear.
I was still on the site. I was below the berm. It was the second time we had done distribution. So when I heard the gunfire kick off, the automatic machine gun fire, I thought we were under attack. I thought something had happened. So I ran up to the southern berm and I laid down to take cover. I'm observing and I'm looking, and I see the shooting keep going on, like just the rap, and Palestinians dropping on the side of the road. So Amir didn't make it home. He walked 12 kilometers to get some food, picked up scraps off the ground, because that's all that was left, because the 8-minute mayhem took all of the food. And by the time he got there, walking with no shoes, hungry and tired, the only thing left for him was to pick up some remnants off the ground. And when he left, he was killed by the IDF. Why? Because they lack discipline, they lack standards, and they lack basic human decency. Now, do I think that they intentionally shot him or shot the people they were shooting at? No. But when you use machine guns and tank rounds and mortar rounds to control a crowd, what do you think is going to happen? And the United States stands by and watches it.
This is how Aguilar characterized those aid centers in question.
The only way I could describe the sites is death traps. And they didn't become death traps. They were designed as death traps. And the United States puts aid and we lure them in. And when they leave, they get shot at coming and they get shot at going. Never have I seen an American behave this way. Never have I seen an army. And I've seen some pretty ragtag armies in my day. And never have I seen this level of depravity and just disrespect for human dignity. And the word I keep using, because it's the only way I can describe it, is because America is giving tax dollars to it. It's un-American.
Strong words, although it's a little curious. On the one hand, he says the lack of humanity, it's un-American. On the other hand, he sort of doesn't describe any malintent. But a reserve officer who served in the Gaza operations for many weeks between May and June has come forward to anonymously provide some insight into the credibility of Tony Aguilar. According to the source, Aguilar was present during the first few weeks of their deployment and stood out immediately for his combative and self-centered demeanor. He frequently clashed with both security personnel and humanitarian workers, appearing more concerned with his personal image than the mission itself. Despite being in a high-stress environment, Tony Aguilar, unlike other military veterans on the team, seemed overwhelmed and volatile. His departure after a few weeks was unsurprising, and he was regarded by many as the most problematic individual on site. The source firmly disputes Aguilar's later claims publicized through the BBC, similar to what you just heard from his appearance on Tucker, that Israeli forces targeted civilians at safe distribution sites, calling the accusations, quote, absolute nonsense, unquote. They clarified that all actions were governed by strict rules of engagement and that lethal force was never authorized unless there was a clear and immediate threat. Aguilar's role was primarily as a radio operator relaying movement orders, and his subsequent public statements are viewed as a betrayal of the team's unified and humanitarian mission. The source emphasized that Tony Aguilar's behavior, reflected the desire for attention and personal gain, not the values shared by those who work selflessly to ensure aid reached Gazan civilians while bypassing Hamas control. Okay. The executive chairman of the foundation in question, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Johnny Moore, was on with Shannon Bream over the weekend, and he had this to say about the accusations being leveled in the direction of the GHF and, frankly, IDF.
That's not leadership. What leadership is what President Trump did on May 5th when he said the United States was fed up with Hamas stealing the food and we were going to do something about it. And over the last 2 months, the numbers speak for themselves. 105 million meals free to the people of Gaza. Not a single truck has been stolen by Hamas. And whether it's this, the 400 being replaced with 4 sites or these statistics about casualties in the Gaza Strip, these casualties that the senator, and by the way, I'm a constituent of the senator, and I work with a lot of constituents at GHF at the senator. These figures emerge from Hamas, and then they're laundered all around the world because President Trump actually decided to lead and make a difference. We're standing here today, and there are hundreds of thousands of lives that were saved. And we don't want to argue with the United Nations, even though they don't pick up their own food, they don't deliver their food. By their own statistics, 90% of the and it's unbelievable. Like to just say, 95% of the trucks don't make it, but we have to do better. That's unacceptable. That's the United States money. That's European money. 95% of the World Food Program trucks can't get to the people in need. We haven't had a single truck taken over. And all we want to do is we want to work with the United Nations and the World Food Program. We want to do exactly what the senator just said. That's the mandate we have from the President of the United States. But every single day, they try to sabotage everything that we're doing. I don't understand why the UN, and while some in elected office in this city and in this and around the world and in Europe would rather help Hamas than the United States, because GHF is a United States initiative with veterans on the ground making a difference.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official. Now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
So I don't know if you know this Tony Aguilar fellow, but what is your handle on what's happening at these distribution sites amid these allegations made by Aguilar?
Well, first I have to say I don't know Aguilar. I've never served with him. And I have been following the exchange primarily on X between the things that Aguilar's been saying and then the other Special Forces veteran who's been the most critical of him, who says he has a direct source, an American source, not an Israeli source, right, on the ground that worked directly with Aguilar and made the accusations as to his performance. That particular guy on X that's posting, I have followed for quite a while. I think he is a solid guy. Don't agree with him on everything that he's ever posted, but most of it is pretty solid. So I just have to look at what Aguilar is accused of and what he's accusing the GHF of, and try and evaluate it as an outsider. So just want to make sure everybody understands I'm not alleging that I have insider info or anything, but it sounds Aguilar's accusations do not sound credible to me. It's not in concert with other things I have seen and I have observed myself with the IDF, or that I've been reading about since all of this stuff started. They do occasionally have incidents where people get out of hand and do things wrong, and they're pretty quick in most of those incidents that I know of. The IDF is at responding to it, taking action, apologizing when mistakes are made and trying to fix it. They also are over the top with their efforts to minimize collateral damage as an institution, way more over the top than American military is. Not that I'm saying that we're doing anything wrong, but they take steps that we do not take. So Aguilar's accusations, that description that you played on the tape, just doesn't, line up with my experience with them or my experience at studying them as a commentator. The other stuff about Aguilar, there are some deep questions about his performance in the past, some of his own personal issues that are up there, some run-ins with the law over domestic abuse problems, stuff like that. I don't know if those are true. I've seen documents posted that are supposed to be court documents, so you got to take that stuff with a grain of salt. But I think this warrants a little more investigation. But I would not jump immediately onto Aguilar's train and say, "Oh my God, the entire effort, it's all the Israelis' fault." Again, as other people have said, this is the first time in any war where somebody gets attacked, they counterattack, and suddenly it's their responsibility to make sure none of the people who attack them are hungry. I think that's a little odd. And I think there's great evidence that the biggest problem in Gaza with feeding the Palestinians there is Hamas. Lots of people have pointed that out of all sorts, and very few, not zero, but very few have really, other than Hamas sources, pointed out with any sort of evidence that the Israelis are the bad guys in this. So more investigation. I think President Trump has been forceful in telling the Israelis, hey, we got to fix this. And I think it's because he realizes that the Israelis lose credibility when these accusations are there and are not refuted with evidence. So we got to keep looking.
And of the decision by, the threats by France and Britain to support recognition of a Palestinian state, like we talked about a little bit last week, but how does that factor in as well? I mean, is that judicious on behalf of those countries to take that approach at this time?
No, I think it's stupid. It's rewarding the people who started this whole mess. And it just is going to give Hamas and the most radical elements of Hamas, which is saying something because they're almost all pretty radical, but it gives them comfort, it gives them aid, it gives them the motivation to hold on to the hostages, to hold that a better deal is coming. And if they just hold out, they can, which they've already done a couple of times, declared, see, it's working, we're winning. We're going to get our own homeland. Well, look, you know that other people have offered this two-state solution before, and every time Israel agrees to it, and Hamas and Hezbollah say not no, but heck no, we're not going to do it. We reject that. So, why in the world France and Britain and Canada think it's a good idea to do it all over again? I mean, isn't this the definition of insanity? That, you keep doing the same thing thinking you're going to get a different outcome? Hamas are not legitimate negotiating partners. They have proven themselves to be completely untrustworthy and completely ridiculous in their demands, but we continue to try and mollify them, and I think it's stupid. And, I'm sorry, Mr. Macron, you're the one who started this ball rolling, and then Stammer, and then the Canadian. Look, you guys are completely 180 wrong from what should be going on.
Trump last week, a posting on Truth Social based on the highly provocative statements of former President of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev. I've ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. Scrambling a couple of nuclear subs in the general vicinity of Russia. How should we interpret that development?
I think I don't think it's President Trump wanting a war. That's clearly not the case. He is thoroughly against having a war with Russia, but he's also not going to let Russia just do its typical beat your chest, talk smack kind of response and suddenly go cower in the corner and grab his pearls and swoon. He's not going to do that. And he is letting them know. He's done this before in Syria when he gave permission for us to literally obliterate an entire unit, several hundred Russian mercenaries who were coming at an American base in Syria. And this is another incidence of him calling their bluff, saying, okay, you're gonna mention these nuclear weapons, essentially threaten us with them. Please make sure this is not just, that this is only a threat and nothing more, because there'll be a price to pay otherwise. That's the unspoken part. And I think Russia, because they have no capability to fight the United States in any sort of meaningful way, will realize this is not the bear you want to poke. In fact, you're poking an eagle now, and that's a really bad idea.
Tulsi Gabbard talking about the developments since she began declassifying information related to the Russian collusion hoax. Had this to say about, sort of the headline was her talking about the quote-unquote deep state, but I thought the more interesting thing was what she had to say about whistleblowers now coming forward.
As we're finding these documents, going through them, declassifying and releasing them, we are learning more about who is actually directly involved and implicated in this. We're learning more about who may have been in the room and who was loudly protesting against it, recognizing how wrong it was. We have whistleblowers coming forward with their own documentation of their protests and their unwillingness to go along with this. So yes, there are people who are still working within the intelligence community who had a hand in this. As we are identifying them, it will give us the opportunity to make sure that they and others like them who, again, are so willing to weaponize intelligence to subvert the will of the American people can no longer work in the intelligence community.
You see, that's, to me, is always going to be one of the positive byproducts of this effort to declassify and advance the cause of transparency and deliver somewhat of a reckoning, is that you get people that are inside starting to read the tea leaves, and depending on what they have to offer or what they're trying to protect, you get people coming forward to act in their own interests and maybe to undermine the storytelling that people like Brennan and Comey have been doing these many years.
Yeah, I think that is an incredibly important thing. I have to tell you, look, releasing intel is not the same as getting a conviction in a court, as much as we would like it to be. So I can almost guarantee that people like you and I are not going to be satisfied with the end result as far as how many of the biggest, most egregious violators here are going to end up in orange suits. It's not going to happen. I wish it would, but it's not. But hopefully some people will end up in prison, and at least a bunch of people will end up permanently losing their security clearances, will lose their jobs within the system, not as a retaliation against them for what they did, but they need to be removed, because I got to tell you, if a person's willing to do this, to lie and manipulate intelligence for purely domestic political motivations, then they'll do it again. And it might be in a different direction. So frankly, even people who hate President Trump ought to think, man, we got to get rid of those kind of people in our system, because what they did, even if you like the outcome of, driving President Trump crazy and abusing him all through his first term and almost stopping him from even running, let alone getting that second victory, you have to understand, if you have any brains at all, that this is poisonous to our constitutional system. This is wrong and damages America as a nation, unless you're so ideologically driven that you think, well, that's worth that part of it just to try and get rid of Trump. The people who think that have to be removed, especially from the intel community. We depend on them to give us real, honest evaluations, not something that's designed purely to get rid of a domestic political candidate or office holder. So we'll see. But I think Tulsi Gabbard's doing a great job trying to get to the truth.
What's your intuition about the biggest scalp that may be claimed? I mean, do you think that Brennan and Comey, Clapper, all of those brand names, if you will, do you think they walk, or do you think there's real exposure there?
Well, we'll start at the top. I don't think they're going to take President Obama to trial and put him in jail. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the calls for sedition or treason against Brennan and Comey, as much as I dislike the two of them, I don't think they'll get them on that. The standard is just too strict and too high for this to meet that level, even though you and I might look at them and go, yeah, what they did is treason. If you define treason as it was totally against the American people and against the interest of the United States as defined by the American people, I don't think they're going to, they're not going to get it by the legal definition. So I think that top level, probably not going to see any of them. I think some of those other folks that are down a level that might be technically civil servants, they don't really call them that in the intel community, but those people that are dug in there, who have not been pardoned by Joe Biden's auto pen, I think we'll see some of those folks. So if I try to put it in a military standard, you might see a brigadier general or two, but probably not the 2-star, 3-star, and 4-star generals, and maybe some colonels and lieutenant colonel level folks that they have actual paper on them saying things that are untrue. So middle to upper middle, I think, is the most you'll see people going to jail. But hopefully a bunch of people at every level will get flushed out of the system and tagged so that they cannot come back, even in an administration that's more in line with the Obama and Biden mindset.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official, now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks as always.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and we'll talk to you next week.
Great. And Stephen joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
We ran the numbers. Overseas furniture makers charge an extra 38% to package and ship iffy furniture to the Midwest.
So out of $1,000, you're paying $380 for nothing. That makes the product better.
But 82% of Penny Mustard's furniture is made within 300 miles of us.
So we're able to invest that extra $380 into higher quality materials and craftsmanship.
American-made